All right. It looks like we have a really great group. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing screen as more folks kind of join our session today, but we're really excited to connect with you all. Give it just a minute more. Well, I'll go ahead and get started so that we have a lot to cover in our session today. And I know Father Wendt, who is the room facilitator, is going to be pinning the presenters, my colleagues, Latrina Hall and Kirsten Fuller Case, in this session today so that you can kind of see us a little bit better. Hopefully everybody can also see the screen. We are really excited to connect with you all today and to share a little bit about how we're approaching our authentic community partnerships through assets, power, privilege, and the resources that we have. Throughout the session, we're trying to make it as interactive as possible, but you know, it can be difficult in these formats. So please do not hesitate to go ahead and put questions in the chat as things come up. And if you wouldn't mind just making sure you're on mute, but please keep your camera on if you can, so that we can see you and be engaged with you as possible, as we are able. So we want to start off with how we start our sessions as well, which is doing a land acknowledgement. So I will start by reading this to honor the land. We deliver a land acknowledgement to acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land, which was taken by conquest, along with the domination of the people who inhabited the land and the imposition of white supremacy. We do it to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights as a small step toward equitable relationship and reconciliation. As such, we first recognize that we are guests living on lands represented by Native nations whose sovereignty, governance, and treaty lands existed long before the state of Nebraska. Those nations include the Omaha, Ponca, Santee, Ho-Chunk or Winnebago, Lakota, Pawnee, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Mescawi, Odo, Missouri, Iowa, Kaw, Wichita, Kickapoo, and Delaware nations. Others might have, this is where we're joining you all from, but you please go ahead and include your own land acknowledgements from where you are coming from in the chat. And my colleague also included information on how to access this in the chat as well. So we wanted to start off by getting a sense of who is in the space with us today. So because we are limited, if you wouldn't mind throwing up a thumbs up if you're a faculty member, a celebration if you are a student, a heart if you're a community partner, a clappy hands if you're an administrator, a like laughing face if you're a community engagement professional, or just a wow if you're somebody.
I don't know how to. I'm a heart.
Okay. Give you a second to do that. Great. All right, thank you. And just to get us all kind of warmed up here, we wanted you all also to react first to think about, get a sense of what kind of engagement do you most collaborate with folks? Are you mostly doing service learning? Give us a thumbs up. Are you mostly working with volunteer programs? Give a celebration. If you work with research, a heart. If you're doing with practicum or capstone experiences, clappy. Medical internships, clinical rotations, a lappy face, or anything else. It's kind of the wow. Okay, all right, great. So we have a lot of diverse folks on here that bring in different perspectives as well. So this is really, really great to know. Yeah, and if you want to go ahead and indicate in the chat which one, instead of using the emojis, that's totally fine, or the indicators. So today we are talking about asset-based partnerships and the frameworks that we use. Specifically, we are from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. We're excited to be with our colleagues from around the nation, especially in Kentucky. And we're talking about the frameworks that we use when we're thinking about partnerships and service learning and community engagement. Well, for us, this is very tightly linked to our institutional mission at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, which is right here. That as a metropolitan university, our mission is to transform and improve the quality of life locally, nationally, and globally. And we know we cannot do this without strong partnerships. And what we're talking about today are the asset-based partnerships that we have that really have the opportunity to truly transform a community. And in our community, one of the representatives of this has been this image of an organization and a partnership that was developed that was able to really transform something that seemed small but was enormous for our community, which was changing the speed limit in a school zone. And it also had an older facility that served older adults in that area. Without the kind of partnerships and asset sharing that we have had in the past, such as the speed limit change, we wouldn't be able to have the true transformational impact. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we get there today. Authentic partnerships are really important because they create an environment where one can truly be transformational. When these partnerships center the community experience, then we approach partnerships in a way that makes sure that we build trust and we are able to, again, center our community partners in this work, then we're able to do a lot of things. When we do not do that, we can validate bias, we can make assumptions, we can invalidate community voices. And we can also hoard power, which is something we're definitely not trying to do. We're trying to share power and collaborate with our partners. And you can see in the images there that we're really trying to get to this place where with our partners, we're not transacting, we are not separate entities, but as we grow closer and closer together, we're able to create something that's brand new, such as the purple color, when the two partnerships come together. So we wanted to start off also with thinking a little bit about what kinds of partnerships are you a part of, and thinking about those partnerships that are truly transformational and do have that kind of purple bit where folks have come together. What does that feel like? What does that look like? How does it make you feel in those kinds of partnerships where you know that these things can happen? So we're going to ask you to put that in the chat. When you have this really positive partnership experience, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What do you know? And my colleagues are going to help me kind of moderate that. We had you hear from partners. Oh, thanks, Hillary, good to see you. When you're hearing from partners and students that these things are transformational, opinions are respected. It's humbling, joyfully humbling. What a great description. Collaboration, synergy, more people want to join in. Trust, power, transparency, impact. Greater than the sum of their parts. Forgive missteps, right? Some might even say missteps happen. This is a really, really great list of how folks feel when these kinds of experiences happen. So you know what's going on. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit today about the frameworks that guide how we approach our asset-based partnerships, specifically with the University of Nebraska, Omaha. And we're going to talk a little bit about power dynamics. We're going to talk about white supremacy culture. We're going to talk about Yoso's cultural wealth model as well. And we're going to use these to frame our conversation. And we also use this when we talk and train our faculty members at UNO, as well as our community organizations. So the first framework that we're going to look at is Kazar's power model here. And we think it's really important that we acknowledge power, which is real or perceived. I think that's really important, and where that power might exist. This is important, especially I think coming from a university. And when we're looking at power in authentic partnerships, we consider this wheel and what goes into it, and think about what power dynamics show up when you partner with folks. Just give you a second to look at that. So it's important to acknowledge this, because when power dynamics exist and are not acknowledged, we do risk oppression of voices we're unable to truly co-create and stifle our opportunities to meet our goals. We also might silence and miss voices, which limit our opportunity for real change. We also then are controlling and creating the context for how the partnership will grow, which doesn't allow an organic way for this work to happen. We also lose inertia and we stifle the ability to move forward. And then people have to, play the game in order to collaborate, which isn't an effective way to partner. And then unfortunately also we know microaggressions can occur. And that is a really negative environment where we know that learning cannot happen as well. So when we're thinking about just our work, we're thinking about how power shows up, and we're training our community partners about power and our faculty members about power. And we're really careful to redirect as needed and to influence folks to make sure that everyone feels like they have shared power and shared assets in the space. I also want to talk about and acknowledge the white supremacy culture that exists and creates implicit bias and microaggressions in our space. This is, these are certainly things that are showing up in our organizations. They're damaging, and they are used as norms and standards without being named necessarily or proactively chosen by everyone. They do promote white supremacy thinking, which is damaging with both people of color and with white people. Now, these characteristics can show up in all organizations as indicated on the slide. And if many of you might be familiar with the Racial Equity Institute, and they have really great resources for that. So when we are thinking about partnering with folks and approaching our asset-based experiences with our partners, we want to make sure that we're thoughtful about what's running in the background. And one of the components of that is power, and the other one is white supremacy. So here's just a breakdown. Again, the Racial Equity Institute has a really great document about these components and characteristics of white supremacy. But just acknowledge that these collectively are nuanced behaviors that signal there is just one right way to do things or to operate. This white supremacy culture characteristics signal a hierarchical power structure, which creates a resistance to shared collective power. And these things are embedded in teaching, trainings, and how we operate, and leaves really no room for other ways to operate based on cultures or traditions. Again, we want to talk, we point this out and we use this in our training for our community partners and our faculty members to acknowledge what's running in the background. We need to consider when and how these show up, and then we are better to able to partner with organizations and start making room for a truly multicultural organization. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Latrina Hall, who is going to dig a bit deeper into asset-based approaches.
Thanks, Julie. So when we talk about taking an asset-based approach, it's really important that we understand the difference between a deficit and an asset. We know the definitions and we recognize what those assets are in the community so that we can place value on them, place value on strengths and the knowledge or the gifts that community members bring with them to the relationship. And so it's asking ourselves questions like, do we look at those whom we serve in the community as being deficient? Do we identify the service that we're doing in the community as for or with the community? And so based on how we approach that, we shift to ensure that we are placing that value on those strengths and assets. So that's why knowing these assets in our community, building those strong relationships is really important. And then we also need to recognize that language matters, and that's so important because when we're trying to make that distinction between deficit and asset, it's important to know the words that could be creating that deficit-based relationship between the community. So using words like help and fixing as opposed to service, especially service with, or framing the folks who we're going to be serving with as poor people, as opposed to thinking of the folks we're working with as those bringing a fund of knowledge that is so, that are basically treasures that we could learn from. Using terms like them and those people and creating this us versus them dichotomy, as opposed to thinking about the fact that we're all in this work together. And then really thinking about the community as co-educators in this work that with whom we can learn from as opposed to just teach. There has to be a mutually beneficial experience that we're creating where we're learning from each other. So in the field of service learning and community engagement, we partner students and faculty members with community partners to engage in service that's identified by the community partner that connects back to the course curriculum. So these are some frameworks that really shape how we at UNO approach the work. So really thinking about actively engaging everyone in the learning, creating cultural effectiveness practices amongst our team members and the students so that we develop positive interactions, making sure that the work is cooperative, and then again, building those reciprocal relationships so that there is that learning from each other that we're working within the community and not for. But what's really critical is the listening piece, because that's how we're learning from the community, and that's how we're learning about the assets and the strengths within the community. And so, and most importantly, is just thinking about and recognizing that folks in the community are all capable of making valuable contributions that we could learn from. So one really helpful model to kind of center within the work is YOSO's cultural wealth model. So it was designed with higher education in mind. However, it can be applied to any of the work that we're doing to help us frame our interactions and relationship building with really anyone, especially folks within the community that we're partnering with. So through listening sessions or just being in space, you can learn about the types of capital community members or the community collectively holds. So YOSO breaks those different types of capital down to 6 types. So looking at aspirational, it would be so conducive to our working together to know what are hopes and dreams and goals within the community or of our community partners. Thinking about the linguistic capital and what various languages are represented and ways of communication are within the community. Recognizing that we need to dismantle that white supremacy thinking that there's only one way to communicate. Thinking about, when it comes to familial and social, thinking about the networks that exist and how those networks have supported communities in being strong and being able to navigate, such as the navigational type of capital, thinking about the skills and abilities that exist that support the community in navigating social institutions, including educational spaces. And then that resistance capital, what has created, what experiences create this foundation of resistance, especially for communities of color, to be able to secure equal rights and collective freedom, because those are some of the spaces in which community engagement or service learning experiences can be anchored to educate students and educate ourselves in learning from the community. So when you're thinking about taking an asset-based approach in practice, you can ask yourself, how can this look in your work within the community? One, just really listening, being willing to learn about those strengths and assets. Two, doing some self-reflection. We heard earlier today about understanding our own implicit biases and addressing those. Really doing some self-work when it comes to microaggressions and being aware of what that looks like and how to avoid them. But then being connected to the community. We just really can't do this work. And I think we heard on the panel, it's not about self, it's about community. So you have to be aware of the issues. You have to be connected to the community. And then facilitating dialogue and getting trained to do that, or bringing someone in who's trained to do that. So thumbs up if you've employed any of those strategies in your classes or in the work that you're doing in community engagement. Awesome. So a couple more ways to approach that asset-based lens is really diversifying outputs, whether it's through your programming, the way you communicate, the way you market, thinking about, is there another perspective that you can take, whether it's cultural, gender specifics, related to social economic differences, that enhances what you do and how you communicate it, to make sure that you're being inclusive. But then also making sure you're collaborating in your community, being aware of those resources, other organizations doing the work, leadership, and other opportunities that you can connect to, and then share and participate in this work. I think we also heard today in the keynote about making room at the table if you have that power and privilege to do so.
So we've talked a little bit about looking at identifying assets, power, and privilege. And we want to now look at, what does this look like as we're exploring this in practice? And so right now we are using the I-Party model, which some of you might be familiar with, as the tool to help frame this next piece. And so we want to think about, what does this look like as we're planning and implementing the type of community engaged work that we're doing? And this allows us to be proactive in that preparation as we're thinking about these three sections of pre-service, this implementation of the service, and post-service. So next we're going to go through each one of these and think about that particular stage and what are some of those opportunities within each one when we're looking at putting this into practice. So we'll go to the first one, and here we're thinking about inventory and investigation. And so here we're looking at the needs of the community. And you heard earlier today from our keynote and from the panel, and also this presentation, how important it is to center the community in our work. And so we recommend engaging the community right from the beginning. And that's when we're thinking about what's going on, what are the needs of the community. Our community partners know what's going well and where there are gaps. And so centering them right away is very important in being able to identify what those existing assets are, but also where we can help support the good work that's already going on. So they should be a part of scaffolding the project from the very beginning. And then we're going to transition into preparing and planning. And so as we're thinking about that, we're looking at project development, we're looking at clarifying roles and responsibilities, and we're continuing to center the community in this process. This is where we might be identifying opportunities for students to engage with and learn from the community, and determine what other resources or exercises will be needed to give students the preparation that they need to do this work. and be prepared to engage with the community themselves. And as we transition into action, and this is the part that we're, this is what all the work is going into, is we really need to think about recognizing that this might look like a number of different things. So it could be direct service, indirect service, capacity building, research, advocacy. And so no one or two or three or four projects are going to look just alike. And so as we're thinking about this engagement with the community, the development of the project, and then this implementation, being really clear about how we are engaging with the community, students having a clear understanding of how this work is connecting back to their course content, centering the community as co-educators is a great opportunity to deepen student learning. I always tell students that I get to visit with, you have a campus educator and you have community educators. And so what a rich, amazing opportunity for our students. And then also thinking about making sure that activities and outcomes are going to be directly linked to the identified community needs. And again, that's going back to what the community is telling us that they need and that they want our students to be doing. Reflection is woven throughout. It's not something that just happens once. It's a thread that ties it all together. But this is giving students an opportunity to reflect on what they thought they knew about the project theme, about the community, about a community issue prior to this engagement, what they are learning through this experience, how that is changing their perception of not only the community, but also how they can be engaged in the community. This increases their awareness of their own learning, but also what role they play, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. This involves all stakeholders. And so when we are making sure that not only students and faculty, but our community partners are also involved in this process, it allows for that continued deeper learning that is so important for students. And so when we are moving through that process, we need to come to this point where we are able to really demonstrate what students have learned. And so this is that chance to showcase those accomplishments for that project. And this can look like a lot of different things, even in our remote setting right now. But this is an opportunity for that celebration, reflection, and making sure that the community is involved in this process as well. We have seen at times where community is not engaged in this process, and the intent of all of this work is to benefit not just student learning, but the community at large. And so making sure that they're a part of this and being able to hear directly from students what they learned in the classroom, what they have experienced through this project, and then also what's next for them. What do they do with this information now? And so this is that complete cycle that we like to turn back to as we're thinking about what does this look like in practice? So we're going to take a moment to invite you to reflect on a few points here. So if you'd like to put some in the chat, that would be fantastic. We'd really love to see your thoughts. But think about 3 things that you learned, 2 things that you're curious about and you might continue to think about after this presentation, and something that you can implement, that you can take back with you and start using. I'm just going to give you a few moments here. And again, please feel free to put some of those in the chat. We've covered a lot of information, and some of it we could just spend days on, one of the slides and one of the theories. And so I do want to provide an opportunity for us to be able to answer any questions that you may have, or also hear from you. You may have things to contribute to this conversation. And so I'm going to pause. And if there's something that you would like to ask or would like to contribute, this would be a great opportunity for that. Can you put the E slide back up? So there's a few comments in the chat that I'll share. Using the asset-based approach is something that somebody shared that they might be taking back with them or thinking more about. Appreciate the reminder that the work should always include community members, and that the service should be authentic to the needs identified by community. The difference between deficit and an asset, that model seemed that was helpful. Affirmed use of asset-based approach, and the quote about campus educators and community educators. And let's see, implementing iParty, cultural wealth model. So these are great comments. Please keep them coming. It's helpful to us to know what resonates with you. So it appears that there aren't any questions. And so
And there is a quick question.
there is a
Thank you.
question. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll just go ahead and mention it unless Cameron would like to unmute themselves. Have you seen any common pitfalls or problems that people run into with this approach?
I mean, I could start, and
Yeah.
I would invite my colleagues to join in with their thoughts too. I think preparation is one of the major issues that can occur. If this is an afterthought, we're already behind. Like, we're already not setting our students up for success and ourselves with the project. And so I think preparation and thoughtfulness around this, really using the resources available to you to be able to think beyond your frame of reference is just really important. But Julie and Latrina, do you have additional thoughts?
I would add maybe investigation sometimes could create some pitfalls when you're thinking about engaging the community in the very beginning to do that inventory and investigation and identify any needs and opportunities. Sometimes we may have a tendency to say, oh, I would love for my students to be able to create an ABC for an organization. So let me reach out to this organization to see if we can create an ABC for them, which, that may be a fabulous opportunity for your students to do that type of work. But that may not be what that community partner needs. So it really starts with the listening and engaging within the community that really shapes what that experience looks like and what that output may be.
Yeah, I would underline everything that my colleagues have said. And I would also add that time is, these things just take time. And when we don't give it the appropriate amount of time, then we fall back into the things that do perpetuate things like white supremacy culture, that are faster, that maybe are just how we are used to operating, and we aren't being intentional about what we're doing with our partners and acknowledging these things as we build this muscle memory and are better at this work. So I think that's one of the big ones for us. I think too, there was something else I was going to mention, and it just I'll come back to it if it comes up again. But we have another question in the chat here that I'll go to. On the deficit asset slide, the last item was deficit program and asset people and community. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Can I take that one first, Julie? So I think, and this is not an image that we created. It was on the asset base, that one right there.
Great.
Not an image that we created, but that one I think really really illustrates community engagement, asset-based community engagement. But the programs are the answer under consumers. I would say really reflects that tendency for a lot of times it's like governmental programs, or even it could be programs that maybe universities create to meet a need that doesn't really take into account like what has the community shared would really, it could be a program that's created at a time where folks can't get there because of transportation issues, you know, or so it's thinking about, it's programming that may not take into account any social issues, any kind of systemic issues that created a need in the first place. Or maybe it's a program that's not taking into account some assets, some strengths of the community that should be part of the planning that may not be there. So it's just making the distinction between looking at the community as you're serving with the community as consumers versus, you know, seeing them as assets and folks who can be part of that work.
I did want to offer up the other thing I remembered about Cameron's question about pitfalls. One of the things that I mentioned in our presentation earlier, but just wanted to highlight again, is that we learned that we have to do this with both our partners, our students, and our faculty. In trainings, we have to send the same message to everyone. And so we had to go through and look at all of our work and make sure that our messages were asset-based, make sure our website had asset-based. And that also, when things come up, we have to address them right away. We can't let them fester. It's just not healthy for our asset-based approach. All right, one more question quickly. How do you apply this model to episodic or shorter term service opportunities versus a service learning course, I think?
So I can maybe start. I would say that relationships are so important regardless of what the service component looks like. And so students are going to engage in a way that we have set this up for them and the way it's presented to them. If we have not done our work to build relationship with the community, then it will show in the type of experience that the students will have. So we still have that same responsibility to our students to prepare them for the engagement regardless of how long or complex that opportunity is. So that would be my thought. I don't know if anybody else on the team has anything. I know that we will be moved out of this group here in a few moments. So I just wanted to say that we really appreciate our time with you today. We know that this isn't the most engaging format, but our contact information is on our backgrounds. And so please feel free to reach out to us to continue this conversation. This is a work in progress for us, as well as everybody. So we really just are thankful that you are interested in doing this type of work.